right, welcome to lecture 2 of the digestive system. We're going to go over the organs of the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract. Gastro is for stomach, intestinal, of course, for intestines, also called the alimentary canal. And the first one we're going to go over is the esophagus. All right, so that's the food tube. Muscular tube runs from the pharynx through the diaphragm. That's for breathing, separates the thoracic and the abdominal pelvic cavities through the diaphragm, and then, of course, to the stomach. That's where we need our food to go. Remember, it's not food anymore. You put food in your mouth, you chew it up, mix it with saliva. Now it's a bolus. So the bolus is going to go into the stomach. Where's it located? It's anterior in front of your vertebral column, your spinal cord. Posterior behind your trachea and the heart. Trachea, that's the windpipe. So that's where that goes to the lungs. Histology, what's it made out of? So the mucosa, remember the layers of the GI tract, you have the lumen, the space in the middle. Then you have the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and then usually a serosa. Now the esophagus doesn't have a serosa. It's not in the abdominal cavity. Most of it's not in the abdominal cavity, so it's not surrounded by the peritoneum. So it doesn't have a serosa. I doubt you'll need to know that, but just a little extra info. But the mucosa is made of stratified squamous epithelium, just like your skin cells. Stratified squamous. So stratified means it's layered. So there's layers of cells. Squamous means they kind of have a flat shape. So stratified squamous epithelium. Remember the top third, the upper third of it is skeletal muscle. So that's under voluntary control. The middle third, and I never learned this, I didn't know this till this year. Middle third is mixed. So it's got some skeletal muscle, voluntary control, and it's also got some smooth muscle that's involuntary. And then the bottom third is totally smooth muscle. And it's gonna be all smooth muscle from here on out until you reach the anus. So we got skeletal on top, voluntary control, you do it yourself. You got mixed, the middle third, some smooth, some skeletal. And then it's all smooth muscle, the bottom third of the esophagus. And obviously its function is for food to go from your pharynx, your mouth, to the pharynx, down the esophagus, and into the stomach. All right, so after you chew the food, the bolus is going to go down the esophagus, and the next spot it's going to reach is, of course, the stomach, a J-shaped organ, kind of a backwards J, located below the diaphragm, which separates the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities on the left side of your body. And its function is to mix and digest food. So food's going to stay in here for a while. It can get up like even over 2 hours. And its main function is to help break down proteins, because the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, it does what's called denatures the enzyme or the proteins. It changes their shape. It kind of opens them up. And now they're more easily able to be broken down into their amino acids. All right, so in the past, we haven't needed to know the regions of the stomach. I don't know if you'll need to know it or not, but let's put it down anyways. So with the cardia is this little skinny area right here. Cardiac is closest to the heart. I don't know if that's why it's called that, but that can help you remember. It's closest to the heart, I guess, other than the fundus. The top little area right here is called the fundus. The most of it's going to be the body, which is going to be all this part right here until it starts getting skinny. So that'll be the body. And then you got right here, it's called the pylorus, the little skinny, the last little part of the stomach. And remember, one thing to remember about the stomach, it's got 3 layers of muscularis, 3 layers of muscle tissue. So it's got a longitudinal layer that goes like the same direction that the food's coming in. It's got a circular layer that goes like around the stomach. And it's got an oblique layer. So this makes it different than the rest of the organs in the GI tract. So, so it's got a longitudinal, goes the same direction as the food. Circular, goes around the stomach. And it's got an oblique that kind of goes diagonally. All right, so now there's what's called the cardioesophageal sphincter. I've never called it that. I learned cardiac sphincter. Cardiac sphincter. Cardiac. And in my class, that will be correct. Cardiac sphincter right here before as food, the bolus moves from the esophagus into the stomach. First, it's got to go through the cardioesophageal, or also called the lower esophageal sphincter, or also the cardiac sphincter. I learned cardiac sphincter and lower esophageal. This is new to me, but all 3 will be correct. Its function is, it needs to let food in, but its main function is it doesn't let stuff go back up. So there's a disease called GERD, G-E-R-D, gastroesophageal reflux disorder, which is basically acid reflux. So that's a fault in your lower esophageal sphincter, your cardiac sphincter, your cardioesophageal sphincter. It's relaxed. So it's relaxed too much and it allows that stomach contents to go back up into your esophagus. And since it's filled with acid, it's going to have a burning sensation. All right, so then the food's going to get mixed around the stomach for a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours, mixed with the acid, mixed with different digestive enzymes. And it's going to go through the pyloric sphincter. Remember, the last part of the stomach was the pylorus. So that's why it's named the pyloric sphincter. And when that opens, it's going to allow, and it's a hormone is what's going to cause this to open. We'll learn about the hormone later. It's going to cause this to open, and then the food, remember, now it's not food, and it's no longer a bolus either. Now it's called chyme, is going to empty the stomach and enter the duodenum. And remember, there's also these wrinkles inside the stomach called rugae. And what these rugae are, it's your stomach, it's kind of like a balloon. If it's deflated, it's kind of wrinkly. When you blow up the balloon, there's no more wrinkles anymore. Same thing with the stomach. Those wrinkles are what allows it to expand. So if it's filled with food, it's going to expand. It's going to get bigger, and those wrinkles, those rugae, are going to disappear. And now stomach histology. Histology means like, hey, what kind of tissue, what type of cells makes up the stomach? So the stomach mucosa, the innermost, right next to the lumen, the space in the stomach, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa, going from inside to out from the lumen. All right, so it's made of simple columnar epithelium. Simple means it's not layers. So it's not a stack of cells, it's one layer of cells. Columnar means it's got a shape kind of like a column. So it's not a flat pancake like the squamous cells. It's kind of like a column. So these cells are good for absorption and also for excreting different enzymes and also hydrochloric acid. You got gastric glands within these, what's called gastric pits. Now, these are kind of like caves or caverns within the mucosa that go deep into the mucosa. And there's different cells here. So you got mucus neck cells up here. You can probably guess what they excrete. They excrete mucus. And that mucus helps to protect the inner lining of the stomach from the hydrochloric acid. You got parietal cells. Those guys are going to excrete the hydrochloric acid. And you also have chief cells down here. Chief cells, you can see it right here. Chief cells. So here's one little chief cell right here. It's going to excrete pepsinogen. That's an inactive enzyme. But when it mixes with the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, it's going to form the active enzyme called pepsin. And pepsin is going to be an important enzyme for breaking down proteins. And I forgot to say it, so let me add it. So all this stuff that these cells excrete, so the mucus from the mucus neck cells, the hydrochloric acid, the HCl from the parietal cells, and the pepsinogen from the chief cells makes up what's called gastric juice. Remember, the mucus is to protect the inner lining of the stomach. So, it's protecting it from the hydrochloric acid. And it basically helps you so you don't digest your stomach itself. All right, so here's the cells that line the stomach lining, the mucosa of the stomach. Mucus neck cells. Remember, they release mucus that helps protect the stomach from hydrochloric acid, HCl. So it protects the stomach from being digested, from digesting itself. So if the mucus isn't working, or if you eat certain things, your stomach can kind of digest itself. You can get a little hole in your stomach. That's called an ulcer. Chief cells, remember those guys release pepsinogen, which is an inactive enzyme. But when it mixes with hydrochloric acid, then it's going to form the active enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin is important in protein digestion, breaking down proteins. Parietal cells, that's what produces hydrochloric acid, which activates the pepsinogen. Remember, it also denatures proteins, kills the microbes. So if you eat stuff with, like, say, bacteria in it, the acid's gonna kill most of that. Produces intrinsic factor, which is needed for vitamin B12 absorption, which helps contribute to red blood cell production. That's kind of extra information there. Now, one way I remember parietal cells, I told my class this: if there's a bird flying over your car and a bird dropping lands on your car, you want to wash it off pretty immediately fairly quickly, because bird droppings contains a lot of acid. Well, what's a type of bird? A parrot. A parrot is a type of bird. So parietal cells produce acid. That's the first way that I remembered parietal cells versus chief cells. Parrots, their droppings are filled with acid, and parietal cells produce hydrochloric acid. And you also have enteroendocrine cells of the stomach. And they're going to release what's called gastrin, a hormone called gastrin. And that's going to cause more gastric juice. So enzymes and also the hydrochloric acid increases gastric contractions, going to mix the food up. That muscularis layer, the circular, longitudinal, and oblique layers are going to contract, which is going to mix the food with the enzymes and also the HCl, and it's gonna cause your pyloric sphincter to relax. So the pyloric sphincter, remember, that's what's between the stomach and the duodenum. So when it relaxes, it's gonna open up, and that's gonna allow the chyme, because now it's been digested for a couple hours in the stomach. It's gonna allow that chyme to exit the stomach and enter the first part of the duodenum. And the specific enteroendocrine cells, they're called G cells. That's pretty easy. So because G cells produce gastrin, produce and release gastrin. And it's called get it out of here, because that's what, when the pyloric sphincter relaxes, that's going to get it out of here, get the chyme out of the stomach. It's time for it to move on to the duodenum of the small intestines. And I already went over this, but what the heck? It's not going to hurt to do it one more time. All right, so remember, there's 3 layers in the muscularis layer of the stomach. So we got longitudinal, goes basically the same direction as the food. Circular, that goes around the stomach. And then that third layer is the oblique, which kind of goes at a diagonal path. And remember, all the other parts of the GI, gastrointestinal tract, only has 2. So that's going to be one difference between the stomach and the rest of the GI tract. And at the very beginning of this lecture, I think I said I was going to go over the pharynx, because I forgot to do it last time. I almost forgot to do it again this time. But anyways, back to the pharynx, kind of out of order here, but all right. So going directly back from your mouth, your oral cavity, if you go and you see that little kind of like a punching bag, the uvula hanging down, you go straight back to the back of your throat. That's going to be the oropharynx. Oropharynx. Below that, you can call it either the laryngopharynx. I always call it the hypopharynx. Hypo means below or lower. Like hypoglycemia means you have low blood sugar. Hyperglycemia means you have high blood sugar. And then above that, posterior to your nasal cavity right here, that's going to be the nasopharynx. All right, so those are the 3 parts of the pharynx. All right, so now after the stomach, of course, the food is now going to enter the small intestine. So remember, it was food. It goes in your mouth, you chew it, mixed with saliva. Now it's a bolus. Once it leaves the stomach, it's now chyme. So it's going to be chyme that's entering the small intestine. So it's a muscular tube extending from the pyloric sphincter. Remember, that was the valve between the stomach and the small intestine. Remember, it relaxes when gastrin is released by G cells. That gastrin causes it to relax, which allows the chyme to exit the stomach and enter the small intestine. It's about 7 to 13 feet in an average person. It's all coiled around in your abdomen, your abdominal cavity. Remember, it's held in place by the mesentery right here, part of the peritoneum that holds the small intestine in place. Remember, the mesocolon holds the large intestine in place. Remember, the greater omentum is the fatty apron that would drape over your small intestine. And also remember, the lesser omentum is what connects the stomach and the liver. All right, so this is what you really need to know this. Most digestion and most absorption occurs here in the small intestine. Around 90 or even greater than 90% of digestion and absorption occurs in the small intestine. So the first part's called the duodenum. It's the smallest, but I bet you're going to need to know more about the duodenum than the jejunum and the ileum combined. So it's only about 10 inches long, so it's right here, kind of curves around your stomach, and also the pancreas would be right in here. So the duodenum, then you have the jejunum, which is the upper part, mostly upper left. I know that's right looking at it, but if that was your small intestine, it'd be on your left side. So up here would be mostly jejunum, all of this. It's about 3 feet in length. And then the last part will be the ileum, which is about 6 feet in length. So all this would be, you're not going to need to know exactly, where does the jejunum stop and where does the ileum begin? You're not going to need to know that. But just know the last part is called the ileum. And then now when this chyme from the small intestine, when it's ready to enter the large intestine, it's going to go from the ileum to the cecum. So right here, so it's going from the ileum into the cecum of the large intestine. It's going to go through the ileocecal valve. So it's the ileocecal valve between the ileum and the cecum. Functions of the duodenum. Its function, digestion. So the duodenum initiates much of digestion with the help of some accessory structures. So you see one here, the liver. It's going to create bile. It makes bile, which is going to be stored here in the gallbladder. Then you have this, what looks like a corn on the cob, the pancreas. It's going to release several digestive enzymes, and it's called pancreatic juice. It's also going to release bicarbonate. The bicarbonate is going to neutralize the chyme, because the chyme is going to be highly acidic when it leaves the stomach. So that bicarbonate is going to neutralize it. So we have the pyloric sphincters. Remember, that's the valve between the stomach and the small intestine, the duodenum. When it's relaxed by gastrin, the hormone produced by G cells, it causes it to relax, and the chyme's now going to come out of the stomach. So it's the pyloric sphincter that regulates the amount of chyme that's going to enter from the stomach. It also has some enzyme producing cells. So inside the duodenum, it's got some cells that produce enzymes. And those are going to help to break down proteins and also to break down sugars into their simple sugars like glucose, fructose. Now, those can actually be absorbed into the bloodstream. You have the pancreatic ducts. The pancreas has two ducts. So it's got one up here that's going to excrete its products up here in the duodenum. And then here it's got another one that's going to join with the bile duct. And it's going to form what's called the common bile duct. So this is where the bile from the gallbladder is going to come and enter into the duodenum, as well as the bicarbonate and different enzymes from the pancreas. So the gallbladder is what stores bile. The liver makes the bile. And remember, bile is what it helps to break down fats or lipids. So fats are like it could be like a blob. The bile is going to break that down and make like little globlets, little droplets. And then those smaller little droplets of lipids or fats are now easier to break down into their components, which are fatty acids and glycerol. So when you break down carbohydrates, you get sugars. When you break down lipids or fats, you get fatty acids and glycerol. And when you break down proteins, you get amino acids. Small intestine absorption. Nearly all nutrient absorption takes place in the small intestine, 90% plus. All right, so three features that help to increase surface area to help increase absorption in the small intestine. The first is called the plica circularis, which are circular folds. So it's inside the lumen or in the mucosa, there's these circular little folds, and you can see those guys right here. So they go around the lining of the small intestine, the mucosa. And then smaller than that, it's like zooming in right here on one of these little folds. You got the villi, or one's called a villus. And these are like finger-like projections. So if it was like this, the chyme would travel from here to here, but there's very little surface area. But if it's like this, same distance traveled, but now with these villi, the finger-like projections, now there's a bunch more surface area for that chyme to come in contact with these absorptive cells, the simple columnar cells that are going to absorb the nutrients. And then on the villus or villi for plural, if you zoom in even further, you can see over here on the finger-like projections, there's even tinier little finger-like projections called microvilli. So you can see that right here. So first you got the circular folds. You zoom in, you got the villus or villi for plural, and then you zoom in on this. There's even more little finger-like projections called microvilli, and that's what's gonna create. You can barely see it, it's small. What's called the brush border, because if you look at that, it looks kind of like a comb or a brush. And then here you can see blood capillaries. So these simple columnar cells are going to absorb the nutrients, the sugars, the fatty acids, the amino acids, going to put them into blood capillaries. And it's also going to put them into lacteals. These are lymphatic vessels, which are going to absorb and take in the lipids, the fatty acids. So the blood capillaries are going to take in like the amino acids and the sugars, and the lacteals, these lymphatic vessels you can see in green, those are going to absorb the products of the lipids, the fatty acids and glycerol. All right, I guess I shouldn't have talked about the circular folds, the plica circularis, because I didn't know it was coming on the next slide. All right, so remember, these are the circular folds inside of the small intestine, and that's going to cause the chyme, instead of just going straight through, it's going to make it stick around longer because it's going to cause it to spiral. So it's kind of like the rifling on the barrel of a gun. So that the rifling makes the bullet spin, which makes it more accurate. But this is going to cause the chyme to spiral, so it doesn't pass through quite so fast. It's going to spiral around. It's going to have to stick around longer, so more absorption occurs. And I guess just a slide to show you those circular folds, the plica circularis. So this little region of the small intestine, in this case, the jejunum, the second part, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. And it just shows you the circular folds that helps to make the chyme. It increases surface area and also makes the chyme spiral around through the small intestine instead of just traveling in a straight line. And like I said earlier, then you have the villi, finger-like projections, come out from the mucosa of the small intestines. Now they're about 30 millimeters squared. You're going to need to know that? Highly doubt it. All right, so they contain vascular capillaries. small little blood vessels, and also the lacteals, the lymphatic capillaries. So it's the the lacteals, which are going to help to absorb and transport the products of fats and lipids, the fatty acids and glycerol. And those are going to end up in the bloodstream. So nutrients are going to go directly in the bloodstream. So this is where absorption is occurring on these villi. And I'm going to guess the next one's going to be microvilli. Let's see. And I was right. Microvilli, tiny hair-like projections on the mucosa. So first we have, remember the villus or villi for plural, finger-like projections in the mucosa of the small intestine. And if you zoom in, you can see right here, here's one of those columnar cells because it looks kind of like a column. Simple because it's only one layer. It's not stacks of cells, just one. And on top of that, you have what's called the microvilli. And if you look at that, it looks kind of like a comb. So that's what forms what's called the brush border. So you got the villi or villi for plural, villus for singular. And then on top of that, you zoom in, you have the microvilli. And it's going to increase surface area to allow more absorption to occur and also helps to release different digestive enzymes into the small intestine. And this is new for this year. Don't know if you'll need to know it or not, but certainly write it down. All right, so towards the end of the small intestine, mainly the ileum, the last part of the small intestine, you get what's called Peyer's patches, which are patches of lymph tissue. Lymph tissue, it's part of the immune system, helps you fight diseases, viruses, and bacteria. So some of your undigested chyme that's in the small intestine, it does contain some bacteria. Some type of bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli. Salmonella you get if like say you like chicken, if you don't cook your chicken enough, you can get salmonella, which can get you sick, and also E. coli. They can survive the acid in the stomach. They've evolved to actually survive that. So they get into the small intestine, these Peyer's patches, they release antibodies, and those antibodies are going to bind with those pathogens, and it's going to help to destroy them. So these Peyer patches, part of the immune system, which is going to protect you from pathogens like bacteria. And also your small intestine also has beneficial bacteria, which helps you digest food. It's actually good for you. But those Peyer's patches helps to make sure that the population of the beneficial bacteria stays at a normal level and they don't get too high. And we got to the final part of the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, or alimentary canal, that we're going to go over the large intestine, aka also known as the colon. It's the organ of the GI tract that is responsible for final absorption of water and nutrients. Remember, far less occurs here than in the small intestine. Uh, Nutrients in creating and the elimination of waste. So it's basically preparing your feces or stool to be excreted from the body. It's about 5 feet long. It extends from the ileocecal valve right here. So remember, when it goes from the ileum of the small intestine to the cecum, it's going to go through the ileocecal valve. So the sections are, so remember, first it's the cecum, and then it's going up. If you're going up in an airplane, you're ascending colon, because this is where the food or the chyme is going up. Then it's going to go transverse, the transverse colon, when it's going horizontally. Remember, a transverse cut is when you cut something into a superior and inferior sections. And it's going to start going down. The food is going to start going down when you're going in a plane going down. You're descending, so descending colon. It's going to turn medial towards the middle. That'll be the sigmoid. And then finally, the rectum and then the anal canal. All right, so here's your sections right here. Will you need to know them? Yes. But remember, we did this in Unit 1. Most of you guys are good at this because I think I had it on my quiz. And most of you guys got it, if not all right, you got most of it right. You also have the appendix right here sticking off of the cecum, the appendix. And it says it's a storehouse for beneficial bacteria. Is that true? It is. But there's beneficial bacteria all in here. So if you didn't have your appendix, you wouldn't even know it. So appendicitis, inflammation of the appendix, so fairly common. A lot of people have it removed. The mesocolon, remember, that's the part of the peritoneum that holds the large intestine or colon in place. Remember, the mesentery holds the small intestine in place. The lesser omentum binds the stomach and the liver. The greater omentum is the fatty apron that drapes over the transverse colon and the small intestine. But this is the mesocolon. You can see it here in yellow, and that's what holds the large intestine or colon in place. All right, so we've reached our last slide. Large intestine, mucosa, and muscularis externa. All right, so the mucosa of large intestine, no villi, no finger-like projections that increase surface area, like in the small intestine. because there's very little to no nutrient absorption here. So we're basically removing the last bits of water from the feces before it's going to be excreted from the body. It has a large number of goblet cells. These are also found in the small intestine. These produce mucus, which helps to lubricate the feces as it moves along through the large intestine. Remember, the mucus producing cells in the stomach were the mucus neck cells. So these goblet cells, these are ones found in the intestine, small and large. Then you have the muscularis externa right here, and it's called the Taenia coli. It's also called the longitudinal band. This was in our lab right here. So this little band of smooth muscle runs the length of the large intestine, and it's going to create these little pouches called haustra or haustrum for singular. So these little pouches, it's going to cause the food or the feces or the chyme, which is, it's almost ready to leave the body. It's going to make it stay in these little segments. It's going to move from segment to segment to segment, and it increases surface area to allow more absorption of water. And it's also going to slosh it around a little bit inside those haustra. So it's going to stay in there a little bit longer and slosh it around. So it's going to allow more water to be absorbed. So yeah, those are called the haustra or haustrum for singular. And you got these little tiny pouches. I don't even think they have a function, to be honest with you. Not even everybody have these. They're called diverticula, and just little pouches. You just got to kind of know what they are. They don't really have a function. You've probably heard of diverticulitis. All right. So, anyways, that is lecture number 2, and I will be back and see you in lecture number 3. So, see you next time.